All right, thank you. Today I'm going to be talking about an experiment called Discrimination at the Intersection of Age, Race, and Gender. So first, let me just define what I mean by discrimination. I mean the economics version of discrimination, which is differential treatment by group status. It's not necessarily animus or what we would call taste-based discrimination. And previous studies, like audit studies, those are the ones where they send out resumes, and laboratory studies find hiring discrimination by race. There's very, very strong evidence of hiring discrimination, especially for entry-level workers. We don't know much about beyond entry-level. Gender discrimination, the findings are highly mixed. It's generally prevalent in male-dominated jobs, but not female-dominated jobs. And then age discrimination, there's some evidence. It seems strongest for female job applicants. There's still a lot of really big open questions in this literature. And one of these big open questions is there intersectionality? And for all of the economists in the room, intersectionality is a social science term that essentially means, are there interactions between group characteristics that affect discrimination? And as a spoiler, we're going to say yes to that based on these findings. Additionally, we really want to know, what are the mechanics of discrimination? Like how do job screeners interact with these resumes when they see a resume? Do people see the race, age, or gender indicator on a resume and then just stop reading? And the answer to that is going to be no. They actually do read the entire resume, but they will spend less time on these less preferred resumes. Finally, can people put things on their resumes to counteract discrimination? And the answer to that is going to be yes, and it's also going to be no. And the reason for that has to do with why is there discrimination. And I'm going to be able to show you evidence of levels-based statistical discrimination, which is what happens when employers think that one group is less qualified for some reason than another group. And variance-based statistical discrimination, which is the kind of discrimination where people see a signal of productivity or costs, and that signal is stronger for one group than it is for another group. And I'll talk more about that later. Okay, so today I'm going to explain the setup for the laboratory experiment. I'm going to confirm the existence of differential treatment by age, race, and gender. Then I'm going to talk a bit about eye tracking, where we're showing people resumes and we're tracking where they're looking on those resumes while they rate them. And I'm going to show you some evidence for differential time spent overall by age and by race. Finally, I'm going to get into why there's discrimination, and this is going to be focusing mostly on race discrimination. And I'm going to show evidence of levels-based statistical discrimination for computer skills, training, and job gaps. And this job gap may be indicative of something like prison time, as Amanda Egan and my new colleague Jen Doliak have been finding with the ban-the-box experiments. I'm also going to show evidence of variance-based statistical discrimination, and that's going to be based on relevant experience and high school quality. Okay, so what we did was when our participants came in, we told them that we were interested in how hiring managers make job interview decisions. We then described a clerical position. We calibrated our eye tracking devices. We showed them 5 random resumes, which we told them represented applicants from the last search that the company had done. And then we presented 40 random test resumes, and the participant would view the resume and would rate the resume on a Likert 1 to 7 scale, 7 high, and then we would repeat. And then we did some other things that I'm not going to be talking about today. Okay, so for the experiment that I'm showing today, we used 152 MBA students, MPA students, HR students, and business undergrads. We dropped 3 participants because they had learning disabilities or were non-native English speakers, which affects eye tracking. And after that, we ended up with 5,960 resumes to look at. We indicated age by date of high school graduation, and age ranged from 36 to 76. It was supposed to be 35 to 75, but we had IRB problems. Well, someone laughed. And then we indicated race by name. Okay, so for the resume details, these were just high school graduates, and that's important. For the demographics of these resumes, we used about what the demographics were for entry-level clerical positions in the state of Texas. I think we used the ACS for that. They were around 50% female, 9% black first names, 14% Hispanic last names, and then we would give them 1 to 10 years of recent work experience on the resume. 9% of them were currently unemployed. 17% of them had up to 1 year of additional educational experience. 7% had a computer certificate, 10% had volunteer work, and then something that's a little bit unusual is we gave them a uniform distribution of ages across the distribution. In terms of participant characteristics, they were about 56% female, they were mostly white, and then you can see the other characteristics in terms of their demographics. The average age is around 22. Okay, so the average rating for these resumes, again, remember this was a 1 to 7 scale with 7 high, was about 4.63. So first I'm going to show you the existence of age discrimination and intersectionality with age discrimination. And I'm going to show you the most cool graph that I have made in my entire career as a researcher. And this is not it. What you see here is age on the x-axis. So this is the age that's listed on the resume as indicated by date of high school graduation. And here's the scale, the Likert scale that people gave for each resume. And these are the resumes with white names. And you can see that as the age gets higher, people start liking these resumes less. And then there's this little dip up sometime in the mid-60s. This seems to be real. It also shows up in audit studies and other kinds of experiments. So that would be interesting for future research. Here's what the graph looks like for the resumes with the black names. Now this is a low S. This is a local weighted regression. I have imposed no functional form on this. And you can see, again, that as the age on the resumes gets higher, the ratings of the resume start much lower. This difference is about half of a standard deviation, 40% of somewhere between 40 and 50% of a standard deviation. As the age on the resume gets higher, they start liking the black resumes more. And in this specification, it actually surpasses around middle age, and then it drops lower again. You can put a functional form on here, and you can see that these differences are significant at the two ends. This part in the middle, it depends on your specification about whether that's significant or not. Okay, so we can take this and we can put it in a basically an equation format, which is here you can see if we don't put in any interactions, that the main effect of having a black name is negative, but it's not significant. This suggests that if Bertrand and Mullinathon in their famous experiment had not limited to entry-level workers, that they might not have found the stunning results that they did in terms of race discrimination. When we do put in those age and race interactions, you see everything becomes significant, and the main effect for black is strong and negative. We can also break apart by gender, and you can see here that things look pretty similar for men and women, although for the white men, the line is a bit flatter. And again, you can see the same thing when we do the equations. Okay. You may be worried about external validity. And so one of the things that we do to test the external validity here is we take the matched monthly CPS and we look at job flows. And so what we're doing here is our Y value is if you were employed in time, if you were unemployed, you specifically said you were seeking work in time period T, and then you became employed in period time T plus 1. And this measure has a bunch of problems, but we think it's the closest that we can get to this hiring margin that you get when you do an audit study or this kind of laboratory experiment. And here you can see the same kind of pattern. If we look just at women, the pattern is much, much more similar. And you can see the same quadratic here and the same quadratic here. Okay, so things to note, discrimination by race seems stronger for the young and for the very old. Men are rated lower than women for this job. It's a female-dominated job. That may not be surprising. Black men and black women show the same negative quadratic with age. And this may be different in the general equilibrium labor market. And so the bottom line of this part is to say, yes, there is intersectionality by age. Black people and white people are treated differently throughout their lifespans in terms of employment hiring. We did a whole bunch of robustness checks that I'm just summarizing here. We put in fixed effects, we normalized Y by participant, we removed Hispanic resumes, we limited resumes to under age 66. Those results are actually stronger. We controlled for the socioeconomic status of the first name. And we also find no difference by participant HR experience, hiring experience, or age, which helps us think that maybe we have a bit more external validity. And we find no difference by the participant ethnicity or their education group. Okay, the second part is eye tracking. How are people interacting with these resumes? And we want to know, what are the mechanics of this differential treatment? Do people spend different amounts of time looking at the resumes? Do they look for specific things that can help combat stereotypes? And the computer just tracks where your eyes are viewing with this eye tracking. It's unobtrusive, there's no headset, there's no chin rest, there's no goggles. It's really just this little, you can't see it here, but there's this little black box underneath the monitor. And this is a kind of an old-fashioned eye tracking setup. We're doing some studies now where we have state-of-the-art eye trackers, and they're even smaller. With just a laptop. Okay, so here's an example of a resume. Eye tracking isn't completely precise. If we wanted to know exactly what line people were looking at, we'd have to blow up the resumes to be kind of bigger. So we break up the resumes in these areas of interest, or AOI. And so this is like a name AOI, this is an address AOI, employment years, employment history, and so on. And so we have a general idea of which areas people are looking at when they look at the resumes. Here's an example of a couple of glide paths, and you can see that glide path is the fancy word for where are they looking. And you can see that it's not quite perfect, but mostly they start at the top and they go down and then they go up again and they go down again. On average, people spend about 16 seconds looking at each of these resumes, and this is pretty close to what human resources professionals will tell you is like around 15 seconds that they spend interacting with an entry-level resume. And most of that time is spent on employment history, which is not surprising. It's the biggest box and possibly the most interesting. And if we do those same graphs in terms of how long do people look at the resumes by age, you can see the same kind of pattern for the white resumes as we saw before, and a similar pattern for the black resumes as before, although at these older ages, the time seems to go up for both groups, possibly because you have to do some subtraction in your head in order to figure out how old people are. So the bottom line here is that screeners do not process resumes differently by age and by race. I'm not showing you some heat maps, but a heat map is where you can see where people are looking most intensively, and they look about the same when you control for the amount of time that's spent overall. You can't really tell which one is which. Additionally, the transition matrices, so going from AOI to AOI, are not statistically different from each other. They are not processing these resumes differently, they're just spending different amounts of time on them. So to summarize there, the pattern by race is similar to the pattern for ratings, although it's more of a cubic than a quadratic for black resumes. Screeners read younger black resumes. They read through the entire thing in the same way that they do the other groups, but they spend less time on them. Okay, so now we can look at some theories of discrimination. And because those differences were so big for the younger black and white groups, we're going to be focusing on them a bit more. The paper has all age groups in there. So first, we can't really say much about taste-based discrimination. So taste-based discrimination is the kind of discrimination that you tend to think about when you think about discrimination. It's a distaste for black people, or you get pleasure from discriminating against black people. And we can't entirely explain the results, because if it's just some flat distaste for black people, it wouldn't change over the life cycle, and we do see changes over the life cycle here. But there could be more complicated theories that are out of scope of this paper of taste-based discrimination, so we can't rule it out. Another kind of discrimination is levels-based statistical discrimination. And this is when screeners believe that on average, black people are worse than white people for specific characteristics. And this kind of discrimination means that if you provide positive information on the resume, it should help the younger black applicants more than it helps the younger white applicants. Because you have this average belief about what these people have. Like, you might think that younger white applicants have computer skills, younger black applicants don't have computer skills. If you put computer skills on both resumes, that's not providing any new information for the younger white applicants, but it is providing new information for the younger black applicants. If this is the case, then screeners should spend relatively more time on the younger black resumes that have this information. Oh, positive information on the resume should help younger black applicants more than whites. Screeners should spend relatively more time on the younger black resumes that have this information, and they should spend relatively more time on the area of interest with a positive item for these younger black resumes. And so I'm going to show you some evidence here. So here we're looking at the effect of the Likert ratings. Remember, that was a 1 to 7 scale. 7 is high. And you can see that putting computer experience on the resume increases the ratings of black resumes compared to white resumes by about 1 percentage point. Or not percentage point, one point on a Likert scale. So having computer experience helps younger black resumes more than it helps younger white resumes. Similarly, for the job gap, the more years of job gap that you have, that hurts white applicants more than it hurts black applicants. So it's not good to have lots of years of job gap on your resume, but it's worse if on a white resume than on a black resume, which is also consistent with statistical discrimination, that they just assume that black people will have these gaps on their resumes. For clerical experience, we don't see evidence of levels-based statistical discrimination. Here, having clerical experience on your resume helps white applicants more than it helps black applicants. Now we can look at the results for time spent viewing the resume. And we can see that having computer experience on your resume helps younger black applicants more than it helps younger white, not helps, but they spend 10 seconds longer compared to similar white applicants. We see positive but not significant results for years of job gap. And again, we see this negative sign for clerical experience, which is not what you would expect if this were levels-based statistical discrimination. We also look at AOI. The sign goes the right way for computer, but it's not statistically significant. This may just be that our eye tracker is not quite good enough to get that precise information for these boxes. Okay, so. Yeah. 10 seconds is a lot, yeah. So bottom line, there's evidence that screeners believe that black applicants have worse computer skills. It helps black ratings more than white. Screeners spend comparatively more time on black resumes with computer training. They possibly spend comparatively more time on the other section for black resumes with computer training. Job gaps hurt white applicants more than black applicants, and there's no evidence that they believe that black applicants have worse or less relevant experience. A third kind of discrimination is variance-based statistical discrimination. Variance-based statistical discrimination occurs when the signal is better for white applicants than it is for black applicants. Here, positive information will help high-quality white applicants more than high-quality black applicants. That's because you see a signal, and that signal says high quality. If it's a white applicant, you say, oh, I know what this means. This person is high quality. If you see a high signal for a black applicant, you say, well, that signal's not that great. Is this person really high quality? I'm not 100% sure. At the same time, negative information hurts low-quality white applicants more than it hurts low-quality black applicants. And again, that's because if you see that signal for a white applicant, you're like, yeah, I know this person is low quality. You see that signal for a black applicant, and you say, oh, I'm not really sure if this person is actually low quality. The signal's just not very good. When this is the situation, positive signals will be less helpful for black applicants than for white applicants. Additionally, screeners should spend less time on black resumes compared to white resumes for positive items that are worse signals for black applicants. That's because if the signal isn't any good, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time pay a whole lot of attention to it. So this is what the textbook chart for variance-based statistical discrimination would look like. Basically, you see that for people with high quality, the lower variance group, in this case the white applicants, are rated higher, and the higher variance group is rated lower, and it's reversed in the other direction. So this is what you would see if you were looking in the labor economics textbook. So what we did was we created a Likert quality measure, where a kitchen sink measure, where we put in every single input from the resume, other than the name or the age, because the name signals race, ethnicity, and gender, and all these kinds of illegal things. And so basically we were asking this question: what would the Likert rating be predicted to be in the absence of illegal information? And then we plot this against the actual Likert. And if the quality signal is better for white compared to black, it will help higher quality white applicants and lower quality black applicants. And so I'm about to show you the second coolest graph that I've made in my career, which admittedly is not quite as cool as the one that Suzanne showed earlier today. But I think it's still pretty cool. So this is with an L poly, with the little confidence intervals around it. And you can see here that it looks just like the textbook picture. Well, you know, with enough error that you think it's real and not, you know, a fake textbook picture. No? All right. So here you see that for higher levels of quality, this predicted Likert rating, white applicants are given higher actual Likert ratings than black applicants. And for these lower levels of quality, black applicants are given higher ratings than white applicants. And you know, recall that we're probably going to be hiring people in this half of the distribution. So that's going to help white people more than black people on average. Now, we can actually dig into variance-based discrimination. That was a kitchen sink measure of quality. We can actually create these predicted Likert measures with different elements of quality. And if you recall, when we were doing the levels-based statistical discrimination, we saw that there was something going on with having clerical experience. And so here, we put in all of the employment history information, and we create a predicted Likert variable based on that. So we're like regress Likert employment history dummies. Predict Y hat. And here we see a very similar picture to the one before. It's not quite as perfect, but you can see that this employment history information is providing a lot of that picture that we were seeing before. And this goes very well with those interactions that I showed you in the statistical discrimination about the clerical experience. So there's something about these histories. And if you read a lot of Kevin Lang, he's got all sorts of very complicated explanations for this. You may think that there's variance-based statistical discrimination by high school. There's a lot of theories about, you know, you might, within a school, people are discriminated against, and someone getting, a black person getting a degree from a high school may have a very different experience than a white person getting a degree from a high school. And of course, that may also differ by age and so on. And we see some evidence that, you know, that there may be variance-based statistical discrimination going on. It may just be that we don't have enough low-quality high schools in this sample. So we can't rule this out, but it's not quite as compelling as the previous pictures. Address is another thing where people say, well, you know, do I know what the address means? And we have to caveat that the screeners did not know what the address of the job was, and since address shows two different things, it both shows socioeconomic status and it shows your commute times to work, we're really only testing the effect of socioeconomic status here. And here we see no evidence. These lines are pretty well parallel. They're not going to cross. So the bottom line for variance-based statistical discrimination is that the resume quality signal is stronger for white applicants than for black applicants. The job history signal is stronger, and again, this fits with the clerical experience evidence that we showed earlier. Possibly some evidence that high school quality is important, and there's no evidence that address is causing variance-based statistical discrimination. So to conclude and to put in a caveat, intersectionality matters. Like they say on line, intersectionality or GTFO? No? No? Okay. Race discrimination is strongest for younger workers. It is not as strong for older workers. Participants look at black resumes and older resumes, but they spend less time on them. There's evidence of levels-based statistical discrimination in terms of computer skills, training, and job gaps. There's evidence of variance-based statistical discrimination in terms of job histories and schooling. And to caveat, these results are only externally valid for an entry-level position, and for high school people who are high school graduates with some college. And this is what most of the audit studies have been, that have been done are also for entry-level people, usually with low levels of either recent college graduates or high school graduates. And so there's a whole lot that we don't know about how the labor market works for older people, for people of different races, ethnicities, and different amounts of experience. And I think this is a big area that is only being being chipped at very slowly right now, with the help of the Sloan Foundation. So thank you.
All right, thanks so much for having me. I know I'm keeping everyone from food, so I'll try to be quick. So to summarize the paper, intersectionality matters, again. So we see this really, really exciting sort of intersectionality where there's sort of a preference against African-American men who are young, and then the middle age is a bonus, and then that sort of goes away later in life. We see some interesting results looking at levels-based discrimination where we see that that's caused by assumptions about computer skills or job gaps. And then we see some really striking large results in terms of variance-based statistical discrimination where it's harder to read signals regarding clerical experience or high school quality or job history. So general thoughts, I thought this was a really, really careful design. Normally, I'm the person who gets a lot of these sort of experiments refereeing, so normally I find all these methodological issues. I didn't really find any here. I thought it was really carefully done. I really like the writing style in terms of discussing the types of discrimination. So taste-based versus level-based versus variance-based. That was really detailed, really, really helpful. So if you want to learn some of this stuff, I think that's a great paper to read. There's a lot of big contributions to the literature from this paper that I'll talk about in the next couple of slides. And I had a lot of smaller comments that I sent separately so I didn't bore everyone. So the eye tracking contribution I think is really, really big. This is the first time we've seen eye tracking being brought into economics or policy research for the most part outside of sort of marketing research. And so I think this sets the stage a lot for future work. So for example, Joanna came up with a resume randomization program, which has been sort of fundamental in terms of these resume studies going forward. So I see this paper as being fundamental in that respect of sort of setting the stage for future work here on eye tracking. And it sort of helps open up the black box in terms of like learning more about the employment process. Again, with opening the black box, I think there's a lot of these resume studies that I've done and others have done which just show there's discrimination against, insert group here, but we don't really know exactly why or we can't test why. This paper does a lot more in that regard, which I think is really, really interesting. And so I think that's really helpful. I think it's especially interesting to know how long people spend reading resumes and sort of what they look at, for example. And then intersectionality is really, really important. And I also did sort of an independent literature review, seeing what was going on in terms of intersectionality research. There's really nothing at all. If you look at a lot of the field experiments that I've done or other people have done, typically we try to isolate discrimination against one group and we sort of make the group be like white men or something like that so that we really isolate one dimension so we can sort of increase power. And that's to the detriment of looking at these really interesting intersectionality effects. That's the exact same for research on discrimination law. There's not a lot of research on intersectionality there. And so I think this sort of is a wake-up call to the West that we really need to look at this. And then I think there's also really big implications for these kind of studies going forwards from the variance-based discrimination. Basically what this means is because signals are not as, they don't signal as much for minority groups in a lot of instances, what that means is you can actually get a bias estimate from one of these audit studies if you have higher quality applicants versus lower quality applicants. So basically your estimate is very, very sensitive to what kind of quality features you put onto these resumes. And so what that tells us is going forward, we have to be very careful of that. And then going back and looking at previous studies, their results could be sort of affected by this. So I think this has big implications for how we interpret the past literature. So going forward in terms of like what's sort of the next step for this work or what do I think is really interesting to do, I think it'd be really interesting if it's possible to try to explain these results better. I think that might need to be done by future work, but I really want to know why do we have that interesting figure with the upside down U and then U. Why do we see this intersectionality? What's sort of behind that? If there's any way you can talk more about that, I think that'd be really, really interesting. But if there is really nothing out there, which wouldn't be too surprising to me, hopefully this is a wake-up call for people to actually look into that. I wanted to see more on age by gender, which I understand might be in a separate paper, but I have some work, other people have work looking at older women, which I think is really important given the increase in their labor supply that we've seen. There's a lot of evidence of intersectional discrimination against older women. There's also a lot of evidence that older women aren't really protected by discrimination laws in terms of intersectional discrimination. So I think sort of separate spin-off paper, more analysis there, I think would be really, really, really helpful and really, really fascinating. And I thought it would be nice to see a little bit more on age stereotypes. I've been doing some work right now looking at sort of what explains age discrimination. We have all these stereotypes that are positive or negative against or in favor of older workers, and I really, really like the way that you tested stereotypes for race, and I really want to see a little bit of that for age if that's possible. So one big stereotype is that older workers have worse computer skills, and you had 3 different types of computer skills that you put on the resume, so you can do a lot of really great testing there. There's a stereotype that older workers are less adaptable or inflexible, and you have 2 things that you might be able to put on the resumes that might signal, that kind of signal flexibility. There's also a stereotype older workers are more warm. I don't know if you can test that through volunteer experience, but something that came to mind. Basically, like, are there ways that you can sort of test these stereotypes so we can know a little bit more about age discrimination? And then also, is there a variance-based statistical discrimination against older workers? So that's all I had. Hopefully I freed up a little bit of time so we can get food a little bit sooner. So thanks for having me. Thank you.